In life, there are moments we never forget. Not the birthdays, not the weddings, not the celebrations, but the quiet moments. The moments when you're standing at a crossroads and you realize one decision can change everything. You see, our lives are not always shaped by what we receive. They are shaped by the choices we make when life feels impossible, when the world feels too heavy, when the path seems dark, when every reason to keep going seems lost. And that's where the true test comes. Because in those moments, when it would be easier to quit, the smallest choice can open a door to a completely new destiny. This is the story of Maya. Not a famous woman, not someone with wealth or influence, but an ordinary soul with extraordinary strength. Her life was marked by sorrow, poverty, and loneliness. She had every reason to give up. But one decision, just one, transformed her life forever. And as you listen, I want you to remember, maybe this story is not just Maya's story. Maybe it's your story too. Maybe today, you stand at the edge of giving up. Maybe life feels too heavy. But like Maya, you may discover that your destiny can be rewritten, not by chance, but by choice. In a small city, far from the lights of wealth and comfort, there lived a woman named Maya. She was only 27, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone twice her age. Her days began before the sun. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. The walls of her one-room home were thin, the roof leaking during rains, the floor cracked and cold. Beside her lay her younger brother, just 12 years old, still fast asleep. And in the corner, on a fragile wooden bed, her mother coughed weakly, her health worsening each day. Maya was the backbone of the family. She cooked what little they had, fetched water from the communal tap, and made sure her brother had something to eat before school. But the truth was painful. There was never enough. Her husband had left her years ago, running away when responsibility became too heavy. Her father, her only source of strength, had passed away suddenly. And now, Maya, still so young, was both mother and father, caretaker and provider, sister and daughter. Every morning, she walked through the busy market on her way to find work. She passed by stalls overflowing with colorful fruits, golden bread, fresh fish, and rich spices that filled the air with irresistible scents. But to Maya, they were only reminders of what she couldn't afford. In her pocket lay only a few coins, barely enough for rice or stale bread. She often skipped meals, hiding her hunger behind a forced smile so her brother could eat. Her stomach growled, but her heart told her, he needs this more than me. And yet, the weight of responsibility was crushing. Every night, when her brother slept and her mother coughed in the silence, Maya would sit by the small window of her home. She looked at the sky, at the stars that twinkled with quiet indifference, and whispered the same words again and again. Why me? Why must I carry so much pain? Why is life so unfair? Her tears often stained her pillow. Her heart was tired. She was tired. And deep inside, a dangerous thought began to grow. Maybe I should stop fighting. Maybe this is my destiny, a life of suffering, with no way out. Maya's mornings were small rituals of survival. She woke before dawn, drew water from the communal tap while the air still smelled of night, and boiled rice over a sputtering stove. Her hands moved by habit, repeating the same motions that had kept her family alive for years. Wash, chop, stir, carry. Even the simplest tasks felt heavy, as if every movement required permission from a tired body and a weary heart. On one rainy afternoon, the market was a blur of umbrellas and hastily tied tarps. Vendors shouted above the downpour, wrapping vegetables in paper to keep them dry. Maya walked through the crowd under the thin hood of her jacket, her hair damp, coins clinking in a small cloth pouch at her waist. She paused beneath the shelter of a sagging gazebo to catch her breath, rubbing her palms together in a futile attempt to chase away the cold. An older woman sat on the bench nearby, her face lined like the pages of a well-read book. She watched Maya with an inviting stillness, as if she were waiting for someone to come and sit beside her. There was no pity in her eyes, only a calm warmth that seemed to hold room for every sorrow in the world. "You look tired, child," she said, voice soft like dry leaves. She gestured to the empty space beside her, and without thinking, Maya sat. Rain stitched a gentle rhythm on the gazebo roof. For a few minutes they listened to it, two strangers under the same thin shelter. Maya told the woman a few things, not everything, because pain had a way of breaking the throat. She saved the worst for the dark. But she told enough. The coughing mother, the boy who still believed in bedtime stories, the coins that never quite added up. The old woman nodded, not with shock or a rush to fix things, but as if she were cataloging the life of someone she had known a long time. "Your thoughts shape what you see," the woman said finally. "You are looking for what is missing, and so you find only lack. But there are small lights where you are not looking. A warm cup in the morning. A neighbor who remembers your name. A moment when your brother laughs. Notice those, and they will grow." Maya left the gazebo later with rain in her hair and the woman's words like a small light in her pocket. Back at home, she sat on the floor with her journal, a torn notebook, pages creased, and wrote down 3 small things she could be grateful for that day: the hot rice she had, the neighbor's smile, and the fact she had found work that morning stacking boxes. The list felt almost foolish at first, like someone learning to walk with hope after years of staying still. But that night, she slept with a lighter chest than usual, as if something tiny had shifted and made room. Over the following days, she practiced again, finding one small thing to write each evening. A bus driver who let her ride for less. A child who called her Miss Maya. The list was not a cure. The rent still hovered like a shadow. But the list changed how she moved through the day. Her eyes, which had once skimmed across the market like an inventory of loss, now paused for the small, ordinary gifts that had been there all along. It was not fireworks or a revelation. It was the gentle accumulation of attention. A single line of gratitude each night soon became a thread leading out of the labyrinth. Maya could not say then how far it would carry her. She only knew that the thread existed, and that holding it made her walk steadier. Work came in bursts and gaps. On Monday, she scrubbed the floors of a small cafe until her palms blistered. On Tuesday, she helped a seamstress stitch hems for birthdays she rarely got to celebrate. Some days were long and paid almost nothing. Other days offered a brief ease. A bakery owner would give stale buns, or an aunt would slip her a few dollars when bills became too loud. There was no pattern, just the constant necessity of arranging minutes and coins carefully enough to make them breathe. The market became her second home. Here she learned to read people quickly, the way a customer's fingers brushed over fruit, where they hesitated, who smiled easily, and who counted their coins too many times. She began to layer herself into the small rhythms of the neighborhood, offering help where she could, carrying a sack of rice for a neighbor in exchange for a bowl of soup. These exchanges were not grand, but they built a lattice of mutual care. Maya's brother, Jai, returned from school with eyes still wide with childlike curiosity. He wanted to tell stories of lessons learned and friends made, and for a while, Maya could forget the grinding worry pressing from the edges of her life. She read to him at night from borrowed library books and taught him tricks to memorize math tables. When the future felt opaque and hostile, Jai's laughter was a sunlight she could stand in, a place where fear could not fully take hold. In the quiet mornings, while her mother slept fitfully, Maya allowed herself the rare indulgence of daydreams. She pictured a small rented classroom of her own, walls scavenged and painted by hopeful hands, where children could come to read and count without hunger pangs interrupting concentration. She imagined students who would reckon with history and science, as if the world belonged to them. The picture was both foolish and steadying. Foolish because coins did not magically transform into desks, steadying because the image gave direction to her steps. The days were not all small victories. There were visits from collectors, phones that shrieked with notices she could not answer, and nights when sleep refused to come. But when fear tightened like a fist, she remembered a line the old woman had said: "Notice the small light." Even when the world was a storm, small lights were there. If she looked a neighbor's unexpected kindness, an employer offering one more shift, a child's sudden improvement in reading. Work taught her patience and muscle, but more importantly, it taught her presence, the discipline of staying in the moment so the moment could reveal what it had. Each small task completed was a tiny promise kept to her family, but also to herself. The offer came on a humid afternoon in July. The manager of a grocery distribution center promised steady pay and longer hours. It would be enough to cover medicine for her mother and secure Jai's school fees for a semester. It came with a price: 13-hour days on her feet, irregular meals, and a distance from the home that made caring for her mother impossible without expensive help. Maya sat on the curb outside the center as trucks growled past, the dust clinging to her trousers. The manager's words were practical, urgent floated in her mind. The math made sense. The rationed hope of relief for the month was enough to make her fingers tremble. For a heartbeat, she felt the old, tempting relief. Take the job, solve the immediate problem, postpone the long grind. But the thought of her mother and Jai alone pressed like a weight inside her chest. She thought of the last time her mother coughed through the night, and no one had been there to rub her back. She thought of Jai's homework, ink smudged because he had to do it under a street lamp. Money would solve some things, but it would not solve the emptiness of their hours without each other. Maya closed her eyes. She heard the slow, steady rhythm of the market. She felt the warmth of a neighbor's scarf. She remembered the way the old woman had said, "Choices shape your life." The choice before her was not just about wages. It was about what kind of life she wanted them to have in the small, ordinary hours. Without fanfare, she told the manager she couldn't accept the full-time position. She asked if there were flexible shifts she could take, a few mornings here, an afternoon there, anything that allowed her to return home to care for her mother. The manager squinted, then nodded slowly. The money would be less, but the rhythm of her days would remain. That decision felt both small and huge. There was no triumphant music, no grand revelation. She simply chose family over the quickest relief. Later, when she sat on the single cot and wrote the choice in the margin of her torn notebook, she could not know how many small decisions like that would eventually lead her toward a different life. But she knew, with a certainty that brightened the room, that she had chosen in accordance with what mattered most. The world responded, not with miracles, but with a steady string of small kindnesses that felt like miracles precisely because they were unexpected. A fruit seller she'd helped once offered her leftovers wrapped in wax paper. A bus conductor, who had noticed her tired eyes, let her ride without exact fare one wet morning. A neighbor, a retired seamstress, mended her jacket free of charge, humming a lullaby as she worked. Maya's gratitude notebook swelled. She began to read her entries aloud some nights while Jai slept. Today, a cup of warm tea from Mrs. Fernandez. Today, the library let me borrow 2 books at no charge. Today, a young boy gave Jai his pencil because Jai forgot his. Saying them out loud was not boasting. It was training the heart to remember. One evening, when the rains returned and the roof leaked again in a stubborn patch, a young teacher from the nearby school knocked at the door with an umbrella and a thermos of soup. He had seen Maya tutoring children in the neighborhood sometimes and wanted to ask if she would consider helping out at the community center. It wasn't a paid position, but it meant access to space and resources, a place to teach, even if small. At first, Maya hesitated. Time was already thin, and her obligations to the family were real. But the idea of a place where children could come and learn, where Jai could have a steady place to do homework, struck a chord deeper than practicalities. She accepted. The center's concrete walls were chipped and the chalk was thin, but the room had a board and a rhythm waiting to be filled. The first day she stood before the children at the community center, her palms froze slightly. The children were a rowdy, bright lot. Scraped knees, mismatched shoes, voices full of questions. Maya read aloud, and then asked one timid child to tell the story back to the group. The child's voice rose with pride. For the first time, Maya felt the tug, a sense of purpose that was not about wage, but about meaning. That night, Jai hugged her fiercely, as if he had been clasped by a sudden warmth. "You were brave today," he whispered. The word was small, but it landed like a bell. Maya could feel, with a kind of shy astonishment, that the choice she had made was blooming into something beyond herself. There were still nights when fear prowled the edges. Bills still arrived with the mechanical cruelty of autumn, and the nearest clinic's medicine prices made her stomach clench. But she was learning to let some things pass through her hands without clutching them until they hurt. She watched a sparrow one morning fighting a gust on its wings near the community center window. The bird's little body hammered the air, and then when she had expected fall, it lifted and dove with a kind of reckless faith. Maya found something tender in that reckless faith. She could not control all gusts. She could keep trying to fly. She practiced small rituals. Before entering the classroom, she took 3 full breaths and whispered, "Thank you." She folded coins into the pocket inside her dress with intention, saying this will feed us today. Simple words, not magic spells, but pledges that tethered her to a loving action rather than to a paralyzing fear. And out of these rituals came a surprising steadiness. Her decisions no longer vibrated with panic. They came with a quietness born of attention. Her presence in the classroom became a refuge for the children. They came to expect the small certainties, a story at noon, a math lesson with colored stones, a gentle correction rather than harsh scolding. They grew reliable and bright, and the energy they returned to her was a medicine she did not always know how to prescribe for herself. At home, the cough in her mother's chest eased with better food and small, careful attention. The doctor's visits were still expensive, but she found ways to cobble together funds, and kindness from neighbors softened what money could not. Time, she discovered, could be an ally when spent with care. One afternoon, as Maya walked home through the narrow lanes after tutoring, she saw an elderly man struggling to collect a scattered bundle of groceries. The plastic bags split like thin paper in the wind, and vegetables lay scattered across the dirt path. Without thinking, Maya ran to help, gathering what she could and handing the man the items while he wiped his face. He steadied himself and looked at her with a gratitude that was both deep and immediate. "God bless you, child," he said. He was thin and worn, but his eyes were lucid, lively in a way that suggested a life full of stories. They spoke for a while. He had been a teacher in his younger years and had come out to the market because he could no longer work full-time. He told her, between careful sips of tea they bought from a street vendor, about the importance of seeing people as people and not as lines on billing ledgers. "People will come and go," he said, "but how you touch their day makes the difference. Sometimes a single smile changes the course of someone's life." He mentioned a student once helped by a stranger and how that small kindness had led the student to not only survive but to thrive. Maya felt the sentence wrap around her like a shawl. Here was another echo of the idea she had been living out in practice. Small acts, repeated, with a heart behind them, made a life. She began to see the interconnected web of small decisions, the times she had chosen family over a longer shift, the nights she read to Jai, the hours she gave to children at the center, and how they were creating a life larger than her doubts had predicted. That evening, she closed her journal and wrote in a new line, "Today, I helped a man, and he told me a story that felt like a map." The smallness of the sentence was the point. Maps were not large at first. They unfolded, one step at a time. As months passed, the community center grew under Maya's hands. Parents began to ask if she would host a simple literacy program, letters first, then numbers, then small life skills. The center's coordinator suggested applying for a small community grant that would allow them to buy books and basic supplies. The grant required a formal application and a plan. Applying for the grant meant paperwork, which sounded like a small and distant luxury to someone whose days were usually eaten by urgent needs. But Maya surprised herself. She found a rhythm in filling forms, compiling lists, and writing a mission statement that sounded terribly ambitious on paper but felt honest in her chest. She stayed up late, razor-focus wind in her fingers as she copied numbers, described programs, and argued passionately in the form's margins why children deserved a place to flourish. Jai fell asleep with his head on the paper sometimes, and she would gently move his head and continue. When the grant approval letter came, a small amount, not enough to open a new building but enough to buy durable books and a modest supply of stationery, she sat on the floor and cried. The tears were not of triumph alone. They were a release of pressure, a recognition that steady effort could move things. With those funds, she organized a basic schedule: morning literacy for the youngest children, midday study sessions for older students, and after-school help for teenagers who needed extra attention. It was not grand, but it was persistent. The bold decision had been to build rather than flee, to write instead of merely wish. The small grant shifted how the center could operate. Children who once had no books now received pages to turn, riddles to solve, and stories that taught them about other lives. Parents began to volunteer, offering small labor in exchange for the opportunities given to their children. The center became a hub, a place where small hope could take root. Maya's nights were still ragged with worry, and bills remained, but a new muscle had formed inside her. The muscle of plan and execution. The muscle of believing her small decisions mattered. Word of the center's quiet work spread, not as a headline, but through conversations in line at the bread shop, through parents meeting by the playground, and through school teachers who began to bring students in need. Neighbors who once treated one another like passing ships started to notice each other. There was an emergent courtesy, an unplanned kindness, as if a pattern of mutual care had been sown into the streets. With the center's little improvements, a timid teenager found the courage to apply for a technical scholarship. The boy who used to help his mother sell vegetables started coming every evening, and in a year's time his reading skills improved enough to lift his grades. A woman who had been shy with her child now came to volunteer, then to teach sewing classes that formed an informal microeconomy for a handful of moms. Maya watched these changes with a combination of awe and careful disbelief. She had not expected to be the axis of so much motion. Each small transformation in a child or parent felt like a pebble cast in a pond. The ripples overlapped and extended further than she could fully see. The community's response changed Maya, too. Where she had once hidden the fact that she needed help, she now asked and accepted. There is a strange dignity in receiving when it comes through mutual respect. The people who gave did not pity. They shared because they saw themselves as part of the same fabric. At home, the savings seemed more possible. Her mother's cough improved with better nutrition and the occasional clinic visit covered by pooled funds from neighbors. Jai's grades climbed, and he began to dream in larger sentences, envisioning a future beyond the alleyways. The real transformation was subtle. The city's small corner, the lanes where Maya lived, the cracked sidewalk, felt more like a place where futures could be repaired. The center became a small beacon, lit not by the single flame of a miracle, but by the collective feed of many little lamps. Changes on the outside were visible, and changes on the inside were profound. Maya no longer defined herself by scarcity alone. She still counted coins and still worried, but worry no longer monopolized her days. Gratitude and purpose formed a new grammar for her life. She found joy in simple rituals: the smell of wet earth after rain, the delighted chime of Jai's voice when a math problem finally clicked, the way a song from the radio could lift a tired mood. She started waking in the morning with a plan rather than a panic, and the day's edges softened. Her teaching style matured. She brought games to lessons and drew maps on scrap paper to teach geography. She encouraged older students to mentor younger ones, letting pride return like a quiet guest. Parents began to bring food and stories, turning the center into a shared space rather than an administrative node. But transformation was not a straight line. There were setbacks. Illness would loom again, or a donor's funding cycle would stall. At those times, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, not as a collapse, but as a human needing help. She accepted support without shame and offered help without expectation. In these moments, she felt a humility that was steadying rather than weakening. She had learned that strength and vulnerability were not opposites but partners. Strength let her carry burdens. Vulnerability let her release them when needed. She began to dream larger in a practical way. She sketched plans to expand the center's tutoring program into a weekend skill workshop, basic computer skills, sewing for income, and financial literacy for parents. These aspirations were practical and specific. each step mapped in calendar entries and to-do lists. For someone who once could only focus on the immediate daily survival, these were enormous changes. No life is free from fear, and Maya's was no different. There were nights when the old questions returned with a fierceness. If the grant runs out, will the center survive? If my mother relapses, who will care for her? If Jai fails, did I fail him? These were not easily answered, and sometimes fear bent her shoulders. When shadows lengthened, she returned to the notebook of small gratitudes. She read the pages aloud and let each line act like a tally board of hope. She also sought counsel from friends who had been through similar storms and found there was comfort in common struggle. They shared strategies, barter for food, pooling resources, rotating childcare, small structural methods that lifted the burden. Importantly, she learned to ask for help, not as an act of defeat but as an act of community. When the clinic bills piled up, neighbors organized a bake sale that managed to bring enough money together to cover medicine. When the house roof leaked during a storm, young men from the locality came together to patch it. The community that had once been an anonymous collection of faces became a network of hands. At the center, she instituted a small emergency fund sourced from voluntary contributions, a tiny buffer that made fragile days less catastrophic. This was an act of foresight that shifted the sense of precariousness slightly toward security. It was not enough to guarantee comfort, but it was enough to keep them afloat. Through these trials, she noticed a new quality in herself: steadiness. Not a brash bravado, but a quiet confidence that she would make a choice, seek help, and keep going. Each recovery from fear reinforced the belief that she could weather another storm. Years moved along their patient path. Jai became a steady student with something like ambition in his eyes. He started a small after-school program one summer to help younger kids with homework, and Maya, watching him lead with a gentle, earned authority, felt a private, enormous pride that no coin could buy. The center's influence widened. A local shopkeeper began giving discounts to parents who volunteered at the center. An NGO took an interest and offered training for volunteers in basic pedagogy. A college student started a computer skills club that met on Saturdays. Each new initiative felt less like a change forced on them and more like a slow culture shift, one grounded in shared effort. Maya's mother, once frail and resigned, began to knit again, selling small squares of handiwork at the market. The small income added to the home's resilience and, just as importantly, restored a dignity and identity that illness had threatened to silence. The family's dynamic, once defined by survival, now included moments of joy, planning, and small celebrations. Maya's life did not become free of struggle. She still managed tight budgets and occasional crises, but those struggles were now held inside a life that had meaning. Her days were threaded through with purpose. She felt herself part of a lineage of people who kept passing light from hand to hand. One autumn evening, a former student, now young and employed, came back to the center and told Maya about how her tutoring had saved him from dropping out. He was starting a small business and wanted to give a portion of his first profits to the center. Maya listened, tears brimming, as the ripple reached back to her in a tangible, grateful gift. Maya's story is not a tidy victory tale. There are no cinematic fireworks, no overnight fortunes. Her life remained a mixture of small setbacks and quiet progress. What changed and what matters is the architecture of her days. A single decision to choose family, to choose presence, to choose the small and the meaningful instead of the quickly profitable, unfurled into a life with purpose and a community that could hold its members up. If you find yourself at a fork, tempted by the easy fix or the fastest route, remember Maya's quiet courage. Real transformation seldom arrives as a thunderclap. It's patient, cumulative, and often looks like several ordinary choices made again and again. Those choices build the scaffolding of destiny. So choose the small kindness over the simple profit. Choose presence over numb escape. Choose to say thank you and to ask for help. Choose, above all, to make one decision and then another like it day after day. Your destiny may bend on one small choice. Make it with your heart steady and your hands open. You might be surprised where that road leads. For more motivational stories, please subscribe to this channel.